Mr. Chaffetz is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, with who did you collaborate the development of your testimony that was submitted? Did you collaborate with anybody in the development of your testimony?
I wrote my testimony and I discussed it with my lawyer.
Anybody at the White House?
No.
Anybody within the GSA?
No.
Question about why not fire Mr. Neely? You know, he's still being paid by the taxpayers. He's on administrative leave. He's still taking a salary. This is somebody who took a conference with a budget of $250,000 and made it over $800,000, spent $75,000 on a bike building exercise where we built a grand total of 25 bicycles for $75,000, $2,000 in-room party, yearbook and a souvenir book at a cost of $8,000 to the taxpayer, $6,000 for the stimulus coins that were given out at one of the two $30,000 parties that were given. And keep in mind, there are only 300 people at this, and a top hat program, a recognition program that has fraud. So my question is to the Chief of Staff, why is he still an employee of the United States government?
My understanding is that disciplinary action has been begun against several individuals involved in planning and executing the Western Region
Why does it take so long? You were given this report in February, correct?
Yes, correct.
What does it take to actually be fired from the GSA?
There's a longstanding due process that career employees are entitled to as part of their employment. We've begun that process among other disciplinary actions for several individuals that were involved in planning and execution of this conference.
My question is, why did he get a bonus? Didn't the President of the United States issue a pay freeze?
I wasn't part of that decision.
You're the Chief of Staff. You're telling me you're not involved in any sort of bonuses.
I was not involved in that bonus.
Who was?
The Administrator, and there's a performance
Ms. Johnson,
management review.
why were you giving out bonuses when the President said there was a pay freeze?
The senior executives were entitled to bonuses under our were entitled to bonuses. I don't believe the pay freeze affected those bonuses.
Would the gentleman yield for just one question?
As long as it doesn't take some of my time.
The gentlelady just seemed to say entitled. I thought it was that they were possibly going to be granted. Entitlement seems to be a question the gentleman may want to follow up on.
I apologize. I did not mean entitled.
Oh, I think you did mean entitlement. I think that's the fundamental problem that America gets and that government doesn't get. There are a lot of good Federal employees who work hard, they're patriotic, and they're frugal with their money. But when you see this widespread abuse of money, and then you as the former administrator, say, well, they were entitled to it, that's where there's frustration just steaming out of our ears. It is totally unacceptable. And for the President of the United States to look the American people in the eye and say, well, we got a pay freeze in place while you're getting bonuses and going on trips is totally unacceptable. Tell me about, let's look at the budget here. If you could put up the budget graphic. Is there anything wrong with this number that you see over here? 3.8, that should be $1 billion spent by the administration. These are outlays in the first 3 years. If there's anything wrong that you see with that graphic, please let me know. This is the last 3 years of the Bush administration, the first 3 years of the Obama administration. I'm going to continue on. If you want to get back to me, that would be great. Ms. Johnson, can you tell me about results.gov? You highlighted it as one of the great accomplishments of the GSA. What does it do?
The results.gov, among other online websites, allows Federal government employees as well as U.S. citizens to look at and access data about their government.
So when I type in www.results.gov, why does it come up blank?
I don't know, sir.
Mr. Robertson, you're the Chief of Staff.
I'm unfamiliar with the results.gov website.
So you're citing, now this is the disconnect. You're the Chief of Staff. She's the former administrator. She cites it as one of just a handful of great accomplishments at the GSA, and you don't even know what it is?
I believe that the former administrator's reference to data was about data.gov, but
That's not what she said. She said results.gov, and it's blank. It's blank. It's something that actually the Bush administration does, but I don't see it there. I didn't even go to it until you highlighted it in your testimony, and I would appreciate the GSA getting back to us. I think that's terribly unacceptable. Location solvers. My understanding, Mr. Robertson, is that the GSA employs people that are full-time planning coordinators. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so in this particular instance, Location Solvers is hired, and they were rewarded a $12,000 finder fee. Why are we hiring full-time people to be party planners only to go out and hire a service that then gets a $12,000 commission? Don't you think they would have given that commission back to the American taxpayers if we'd done this directly?
And I do not understand that action either. That was one of the outlines.
I struggle to figure out what you do understand and what you do know. You're the Chief of Staff. We expect you to understand these things. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman of the entire first round. I'll be brief in the second round. There are a few things that weren't covered. So I recognize myself. Mr. Miller, Exhibit 2, a letter we have from Susan Britta that, although she was the original if you will, provocateur that caused your investigation to begin. She writes, or actually Ruth Cox, there's a question, wanted to know why the report had to be made public since she was told otherwise by Bob Peck. Are you familiar with this exhibit?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman.
And I appreciate your completeness in supplying us this. How do you explain anybody, political appointee or not, considering that any part of this would be retained as private, particularly after such a long time of us not knowing about it?
I can't explain that, Mr. Chairman. We always intended for this to be public. It is of such a magnitude and of such an outrage that it had to be made public for transparency.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that because the ranking member and I regularly receive briefings from IGs. IGs, all 12,000 men and women and $2 billion budget, exist to a great extent for a liaison with this branch. I'm more than a little concerned. You've done a wonderful job. It's a comprehensive report, and it's going to change a lot of things throughout government. But if you had to do it again, when would you have briefed this committee, your primary committee for oversight?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we wanted to nail down all the facts every which way before we put the report to print. I'm receiving your message that we should come to you sooner, much sooner than we have a draft report. The process was that we wanted to get something together quickly to warn the Administrator and others so that they can stop further waste. We did that quickly and did it in May 2011. It took a long time to nail down the facts, every possible way, and we got a final report to her in February. She requested an extension of an extra 30 days. I'm happy to talk with you about when we should bring these reports to you. These are sensitive reports. They do contain what we view as criminal conduct.
Well, and I appreciate the criminal conduct, and obviously one of the concerns we have is we need to know from a reform standpoint, from an oversight standpoint, earlier, not later. I'll say this on the record to you, but in fact to all the IGs, the 70+ and all the people that work for them. It's my intention to work with the ranking member to produce a guidance letter from this committee that would spell out an expectation. If that expectation, which is ordinary, we're going to try and be consistent with what often occurs. If that is not something that we see on a go-forward basis, then I will also draft legislation with the ranking member to try to codify in law. It has not been a problem in the past. I do find it exceptional. And by the way, good work. I'm not making any disparaging remark on the quality of your work. But it is highly unusual for us not to receive a heads-up much, much sooner, particularly when it would have allowed us, for example, the 23 letters I sent to other agencies, to begin looking at perhaps the effects of so much money being infused into the government. As you know, Earl Devaney and I worked closely. We were monitoring, through the stimulus funding, a plethora of possible areas in which so much money could in fact be misspent. And former IG Devaney, Chairman Devaney, and this committee worked constantly on this along with the Vice President. So while we were doing all of that, this would have been helpful. That's the only criticism. I'm going to close here with Mr. Robertson. You were previously the liaison to essentially the White House. And I know the word administration versus White House versus president gets used loosely. So let's just take the largest question. In your role as, in fact, the communicator, not representing the administrator, but representing White House liaison, that role in which your job was to communicate, to have no surprises, nothing unknown to the people of the White House, both political and non-political. Wouldn't you ordinarily have reported something like this in that role?
The role of the White House liaison is to onboard appointees into different offices in the executive branch agencies and departments.
No, but here's the whole point. When you worked for Senator Obama, I'm sure your chief of staff told you no surprises for the senator, right?
I don't remember having that conversation in the Senate.
So you would have kept something like this that could embarrass the president? You would have kept it a secret when he was your boss as a senator? Or would you have told the chief of staff then?
I don't know how to answer a hypothetical question.
Well, no, this is not all that hypothetical. All of us on the dais, in fact, you know, we have the same situation that Senator Obama has. So this is not something that's unusual. When you work for a member of Congress, it is almost a given that the one thing you don't do is let somebody be surprised with a scandal that occurs under their watch. Now, I'm going to ask you, because you still have your job. You're still a political appointee at the highest level. And as Ms. Johnson says, you're probably making less than the $179,000 that Mr. Neely is still making today. So I ask you again, during the time that you were White House liaison, wouldn't there be an expectation that you would inform people at the White House?
During my time as White House liaison, I executed the duties assigned to me by my boss, the acting administrator at the time.
So the word liaison doesn't mean anything?
It means that the primary duty of the White House liaison is to onboard appointees into the executive branch agencies and departments.
So you're telling me that the Obama administration doesn't use White House liaisons to communicate back and forth to keep the White House staff informed about things that heads up that may be significant?
My role as White House liaison was to onboard the appointees into the executive branch agencies, my branch agency.
When did you first become aware of this scandal?
I had secondhand knowledge in May following the briefing that the IG gave to the administrator. It was mentioned to me that this was an ongoing investigation that existed.
Since May of last year, more than a year, or approximately a year, have you talked to anyone in the administration outside of GSA that may have communicated it to anyone inside the White House or related areas?
Do you mind repeating the question? I'm not.
It's a fairly broad question. Did you, once you knew this terrible scandal, this waste, did you talk to any of your friends, associates, or other people employed either by the Office of the President or related areas within the administration? Did you communicate this to any of your sort of friends and family?
I communicated to the appropriate people.
Who are they?
Who are the appropriate people? In my ongoing work as Chief of Staff to the Administrator inside GSA, I occasionally and sometimes on a regular basis communicate to the White House about the policy priorities inside GSA, as well as any issues within the agency that might impact administration priorities.
To the best of your recollection, when did you first report this scandal to those people?
To the best of my recollection, the first mention I made of the ongoing investigation by Brian, which I was not assigned. It's important to note that the administrator directly assigned the deputy administrator and the senior counselor to both the relationship with the IG as well as this specific investigation. And after becoming aware of the existence of the investigation, I mentioned it to a White House staffer that I worked with on a regular basis, among other things that I communicated to them about what was going on inside GSA.
That was a pretty good answer, but the word "when" was in my question.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. That was sometime shortly after the May 2011 timeframe when I became aware that the IG had briefed Administrator Johnson.
Okay. So you hear about it in May. You reported promptly to a staff person within the White House.
I would say it was sometime after May, in the next several weeks.
Within a few weeks.
Yes.
Who was that staff person?
It was a member of the White House counsel's office that I work with on a regular basis as far as GSA issues go.
I said who?
It was a lawyer in the White House counsel's office.
What's the name?
Her name was Kim Harris.
Kim Harris?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.